As Jesus hung and died on the cross, the Father brought to completion his plan of redemption, which he determined from before the foundations of the earth. What did the hours he spent on the cross accomplish prior to his death? The Gospels divide Jesus' experience on this day into thirds, and each third accomplishes something different in the plan of God. Jesus hangs alive on the cross from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., a total of 6 hours. The first third, from 9 a.m. to 12, happens in daylight, and during these 3 hours, Jesus suffers the curse of sin, sometimes called the wrath of man. We give it this name because this time on the cross was a period of suffering brought by the hands of men. During this time, Jesus experienced the painful consequences that are common to all mankind because we sin. His body was hurt, his pride was shamed, he was treated as a criminal, he was mocked and rejected. Ultimately, Jesus experiences physical death, which is the final and ultimate consequence for sin. After those first 3 hours of suffering, Jesus experienced an even deeper level of suffering called the wrath of God. During the second division of these 3 hours, from noon until 3, the world is plunged into complete darkness. And during this time, Jesus experienced separation from God, a spiritual death, called the second death in the Bible. The Bible says the second death is existing in an eternal separation from the love of God and under the wrath of God. Jesus took our place in this judgment also, suffering separation from the Father on the cross as God's wrath was poured out. These are the consequences that humanity suffers because of sin. First, a physical death, and then after the body dies, separation from God. Did you notice we experience physical death first, followed by spiritual separation, unless we have faith in Jesus? But Jesus suffered them in reverse order. Separation from the Father first, followed by physical death second. Later, it will be explained why it was necessary that Jesus experience these in reverse order. Matthew 27:37 says, "And above his head they put up the charge against him, which read, 'This is Jesus, the King of the Jews.'" Matthew says this sign was posted above Jesus, which is a strong clue that he was crucified on a lowercase t-shaped cross. On other styles of Roman crosses, the inscription was posted below the person. Pilate recorded Jesus' crime in a way he knew would upset the Jewish leaders, whom he detested for manipulating him. He wrote it in 3 languages, Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, so all who passed by could read it. Pilate wrote the truth for all to see that day, that Jesus was dying, because he was Israel's king, not for any sin or crime. As you imagine this scene, don't think of Jesus high off the ground while on his cross. This is another misconception. There was no advantage for the Romans in lifting a condemned man any higher off the ground than necessary to kill him. Jesus' feet were probably nailed only a foot or 2 above the ground level. The Romans placed Golgotha directly outside a city gate, so that criminals were crucified in full view of travelers going in and out of the city. Since this was Passover, the traffic at the city gate that day would have been especially heavy. As these passerbys came and went, they stopped to read the inscriptions above each dying man out of curiosity. When they read the sign above Jesus, many recognized this man to be the one who amazed Israel for months, claiming to be the Messiah. All wondered the same thing. If this man was the Messiah with power from God, why doesn't he perform a miracle for himself? Jesus went silently, like a lamb to slaughter, because he wasn't going to use that power. But no one in the crowd considered that possibility. So out of ignorance, they mocked God's plan to save humanity. Matthew 27:38 says, "At that time 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left." Convicted criminals were never punished with confinement because Romans viewed confinement as free living. Minor crimes were punished either with a fine or scourging. Major crimes were punished by death, either decapitation for Roman citizens or by crucifixion for non-citizens. If these men were just thieves, they would have been scourged, not crucified. So their crime must have been something greater. The Greek word used here for robbery is sometimes used to describe insurgents, as in someone stealing power in a coup. Josephus, an ancient historian of Jesus' time, used this same word to refer to those trying to overthrow Rome. And rebellion against Roman rule was punishable by death. These men were likely associates of Barabbas, who was also an insurgent. And had it not been for Jesus, all 3 of those men would have died today. Matthew 27:42 tells us about their jeers. "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him." Initially, Satan thought it best to turn Israel against Jesus and to use Israel to put Jesus to death on the cross. But now, as he watches Jesus dying willingly, he starts to wonder if he's overplayed his hand. Satan realizes that Jesus' death is part of God's plan to defeat sin, and now he scrambles to undo it. He prompts the crowd to call for Jesus to come down from the cross in the hope he can tempt him to give in to the pain and give up the plan. This is just a good example of how we must misjudge God's purposes when we don't understand his plan. That was Jesus' situation, mocked for weakness, but displaying unequaled strength in securing salvation for us. As the psalmist wrote, Jesus did it by his own strength. Although Jesus was alone in the beginning, he soon turned an enemy into a friend. As Matthew wrote, both of these thieves mocked Jesus at first, but then the Spirit of God began to work in one man's heart. Near the end of the first 3 hours, he suddenly stops rebuking Jesus and begins to rebuke his fellow thief. Luke 23:40-42 says, "But the other answered, and rebuking him said, 'Do you not even fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed are suffering justly, for we are receiving what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong.' And he was saying, 'Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom.'" The words were not the same words we might use today, but the heart is the same. It's an appeal for mercy. How did that man come to know all these things, especially in that short moment, and without anyone explaining it? He learned it the same way we all learn it, because the Father in heaven revealed it to him by means of the Spirit of God. The thief on the cross is our proof that it's never too late for anyone to believe and be saved.